When people think of the best moege or lighthearted slice-of-life visual novels, two titles that often appear on favorites list are If My Heart Had Wings or Aokana 4 Rhythms Across the Blue. Both have themes centered around flying or aviation but convey different tones. If My Heart Had Wings is more grounded and focuses on wholesome romance, while Aokana leans towards sports drama in almost every route while still maintaining some degree of lighthearted comedy. But what if I told you there is a condensed fusion between these two visual novels and a relatively modernized moege? Enter Under One Wing, the one and only visual novel developed by Harmorize. If you followed the visual novel scene long enough, you may have heard of it, as it's translated by the now defunct Soul Press. While you can still find this visual novel on Steam, sadly it is still the only title Harmorize ever created. According to their website, they seem to be inactive now, which is unfortunate because what they have here is surprisingly good. I mentioned earlier how this game fuses elements from Aokana and If My Heart Had Wings, particularly in its aviation theme. The setting revolves around characters piloting fighter planes. The main characters each have specific fighter planes that resemble real models used in actual wars, but primarily used for travel between areas. These planes can also be used for mock battles and competitions called Fairy Fight. Don't worry, unlike real combat, there are no actual deaths involved. Once the competition and rules are set, participants must follow specific guidelines to defeat opponents, allowing them to go all out without the risk of serious injury. This aspect of the visual novel reminds me of Aokana, which features similar themes with its unique sport in flying circus. However, Under One Wing doesn't delve as deeply into the fighting plane sport. If you wanted to enjoy Aokana as a moege but did not want to engage with its in-depth sports drama, you might prefer Under One Wing, where the fighter plane competitions serve primarily as short backdrops to develop character relationships. At its core, Under One Wing is a moege or lighthearted slice-of-life visual novel, which brings us back to comparisons with If My Heart Had Wings. Each character owns their own fighter plane, and both the common route and heroine routes explore their emotional issues in relations to their planes. The common route features most of the world building and character introductions. You'll find a surprising amount of development for the main four heroines and, to a lesser extent, the main character. Everything learned about the heroines and the common route ultimately leads to the only important decision in the entire visual novel, choosing a fighter plane that interests you most, which immediately puts you on a heroine's route. All four heroines deal with interesting conflicts, usually personal ones. Without getting too spoilery, here's what stands out to me about each route. Hikari kind of feels like a discount version of Asuka from Aokana. She's a somewhat hyper, pink-haired girl implied to be the main heroine with great enthusiasm for flying. In this case, Hikari just simply wants to become a better pilot. Mimari embodies that blunt kudere personality reminiscent of Rei Ayanami, but is ultimately just a nice girl dealing with family issues that annoy her. Nahoko is a mischievous senpai who juggles her role as a busy student council president at their school. Her route features a rare friends with benefits scenario that starts off well but ultimately feels poorly executed. Nahoko eventually treats Junchi like her sexual plaything until romance develops. The standout heroine for me was definitely Kazusa, the resident tsundere. She ends up rooming with Junichi due to a misunderstanding due to their coincidentally shared last name, a situation that could have easily led to tired tropes of accidental perversion. Thankfully, Kazusa is surprisingly reasonable, with many mishaps stemming from her rolling around in her sleep rather than unfairly blaming Junichi. Their shared living arrangement leads to significantly more interactions between the two, making Kazusa feel like she could be considered the main heroine over Hikari. Her route features some memorable character development as she deals with her insecurities that improve through her relationship with Junichi. If you're someone who cares about route order, I personally recommend saving Kazusa's route for last if you're one of those people who likes to put the closest thing to a true route as the last thing you read, where I would only make an exception if you just happen to connect with one of the other four main heroines more. Unfortunately, as much as I've been praising this visual novel, there are a few flaws that bring it down from its potential greatness. While I find most of the heroine routes decent enough, they feel a bit short compared to those in If My Heart Had Wings and Aokana, which feature lengthier routes for each main heroine, meaning more time for slice of life and character development. However, if that was just the short length, I wouldn't be that big of an issue, as I've had visual novels that are short and sweet that I really enjoy. However, what I find brings me back to comparisons with If My Heart Had Wings and Aokana again, is that Under One Wing has significant flaws taken from each of those games. In terms of comparisons to If My Heart Had Wings, every route in Under One Wing is incredibly formulaic and predictable. The structure of every route is essentially, protagonist finds himself in love with the heroine, they confess shortly after, there are several H scenes in a row, followed by some mild character drama culminating in a fairy fight competition. In If My Heart Had Wings, I did not mind this formulaic flaw much since they were decently long and featured characters with very different motivations for development. This somewhat applies to Under One Wing, but due to its relatively shorter romance routes, and having to cram in fighter plane fights along with H scenes, the development isn't quite as memorable as it could be. As far as comparisons to Aokana, I find there's a huge disparity in quality between different routes. With Aokana, it at least had routes dedicated more towards the flying circus sport, while others focused more on romance while still incorporating some flying elements on the side. Not only does Under One Wing have a very predictable formula, but ultimately I find that the heroine writing is inconsistent as well. For example, I stated Kazusa by far has the best written due to her having more screen time and interesting emotional depth and development, while Nahoko's friends with benefits scenario was painful to watch due to how she treated Junichi initially. Hikari and Mimari's routes were fine, however Hikari's was maybe slightly worse due to leaving some open-ended threads at the end of the route for some reason, kind of copying Asuka's route from Aokana again, but making the ending completely the opposite in a way. Overall, I do recommend Under One Wing. It's not the best Moege ever by any means, but if you're looking for an alternate version of If My Heart Had Wings or Aokana, this is the closest thing available, as it has solid, wholesome romance character development with a fun, unique gimmick of short but sweet fighter plane battles to make it stick out. Depending on your taste, you could potentially like it more if you prefer shorter visual novels, or if you just happen to connect well with at least one or two of Under One Wings' main heroines. However, recommending buying it comes with unfortunate caveats, since it was published by Soul Press, a visual novel translation publisher that is no longer operational due to controversy related to taxes and other issues, including their CEO to abandon responsibilities. Essentially, no one can use Soul Press anymore. Therefore, I would personally only recommend buying this visual novel on Steam for convenience, because between Hamrise, the original Japanese developer, basically being dead, and Soul Press being defunct, but apparently not dead enough to close their Steam page, raises questions about how worthwhile purchasing the English version really is, since you can't get it anywhere else. Regardless, if you can find a way to read it, I still recommend it regardless. I gave Under One Wing an 8 out of 10.